The Titans have had some truly offensive tackle play over the last few years, and it's taken what would have been perfectly mediocre offenses and made them totally non-functional. But they took JC Latham 7th overall in last year's draft, and I think they finally found at least one franchise tackle who can be a solid starter at the minimum. I loved Latham as a prospect. I liked his rookie tape. I think the ceiling is much higher than just a solid starter, but the first step for Tennessee is not having a completely disastrous tackle duo, and I'm confident Latham will fill at least one part of that equation. Now, 90% of rookie tackles are not good by veteran standards. Once every few years, you get a Joe Alt, Tristan Wirfs caliber player who plays at a Pro Bowl level right out the gate. But the vast majority of even first-round rookies are below average in year one. You look at the career trajectory of players like Andrew Thomas, Christian Darrisaw, Colton Miller, Paris Johnson Jr., that's kind of the standard sequence of development for young tackles, where the first season is mediocre and then year two you see a massive jump in their level of play. And I say all that for one, to establish realistic expectations for a rookie tackle, but also to highlight the levels of tackle play that exist in the NFL. And from the Titans' perspective, the benefit of jumping up a tier, even if you're just going from dreadful to subpar. When you look at JC Latham's statistical profile from last year, it's firmly below average across the board. This graphic has 8 key metrics for offensive linemen, and the percentile, rank, and plot shows how the player compares to every tackle since 2006. And you can see Latham was 17th to 38th percentile in everything. But I want to quickly set the stage for what Tennessee was working with at tackle before Latham, for anyone who's unaware, or for any Titans fans who scrubbed that period of time from their memory, because the floor that Latham gives you, even if he doesn't develop at all from this point, is exponentially higher than what you get from legitimately bad tackles, and that baseline of stability should make you optimistic. Latham looked like Tyron Smith compared to the turnstiles the Titans have been putting on the field since Lewan retired. In 2023, they tried to plug their left tackle hole with Dennis Daly, who put up one of the worst single-season blocking performances in NFL history, 4th percentile or worse in every pass blocking metric. He's the kind of player where it felt like no matter who they replaced him with, it had to be an upgrade. But the replacement ended up being Andre Dillard, who without Jeff Stoutland's supervision set the NFL record with a 3.93% sack rate. Now, if you look closely at the graphic, you might notice there's actually one player over the last 20 years with a worse sack rate, and that player is Jalen Duncan, who replaced Dillard over the second half of 2023 when he got injured and easily beat his record for the highest sack rate allowed. He also set NFL record lows for PFF grade, PFF pass blocking grade, and pressure rate. And then they also had NPF, who followed up a poor rookie year with a gambling suspension, a season-ending injury, and an Andre Dillard caliber performance in 2024 as a full-time starter. So to be a noticeable upgrade, JC Latham basically needed to have a pulse and not have a FanDuel account. And I would say I'm content with his rookie year. His performance overall was right on par with an average first-round tackle, and there's definitely some stuff he's got to clean up to reach his ceiling, but the blend of power and technical polish that he showed makes me really excited for his upside, especially with Bill Callahan coaching him. Latham kind of gets typecasted as this mauling phone booth tackle who, wins purely with raw power, and those physical traits are definitely valuable, but my favorite aspect of his game is his hand usage, which was a strength coming out of college, and after a year of Callahan's coaching, it became a foundational weapon and a true point of advantage in pass pro. I'll break down the intricacies in more detail later, but I honestly view Latham as more of a technician than a power player, like if I had to define him into one archetype. So I love the natural talent and the detail and nuanced technique he plays with, but he's not a finished product yet, and his rookie season had too many peaks and valleys to call it a resounding success. There were 2 nightmare disaster performances. Week 1 against Chicago, which I'll kind of give him a pass for because it was the first game of his career, but that was a rough start. And then week 12, the first matchup at Houston, he got dusted by Will Anderson and Daniil Hunter all game. Those 2 games are the clear blemishes on his resume. Like I said, rookie tackles are expected to struggle, so you got to grade him on a curve, but those are the kind of performances that can't happen as he gets further into his career. The final points I got to hit in what has turned into a long introduction are the position and weight changes. So he's moving to right tackle this year. From the outside, that move seems to have more to do with Dan Moore being a left tackle only and then Latham sliding into the other spot. I don't see a noticeable difference in Latham's level of play at either side. He played left tackle in high school and as a rookie, and he played right tackle at Alabama. Obviously, I didn't watch him in high school, but from all of my viewing, he seems like a player with positional versatility, and if switching sides is the best way to maximize Dan Moore, that seems like a good decision. And then the weight gain and loss over the last year is another important factor to make note of. So he was 342 pounds at the combine. According to Latham, he was playing at a good weight early in the season, but got up to 370 by the end of the year, and then he's dropped back down to 337 as of this summer. Now, I have a strict policy against buying into off-season body transformation stories. I am completely unmoved by someone being in the best shape of their life in June, but that's not to suggest that playing weight isn't critical in the NFL. It's just not something I put any stock into until it shows up on tape. With that being said, Latham's weight fluctuation does answer a lot of the inconsistencies that showed up on the field last year. Before all this came out, I watched Latham's rookie tape and I was trying to write an article on him, and I found it really tough to decisively summarize and evaluate how good of an athlete he is, or was last year, I guess, because there's a lot of conflicting information on his tape. Some games he looks like a legitimate NFL left tackle caliber athlete. Sometimes he looks slow-footed and lumbering closer to how he looked in college. So keep that in mind as something that was probably a hindrance later in the season and as a clear avenue for significant improvement if he can get it under control. But it can be easy to selectively write off and dismiss issues as weight-related and easy to fix, so I try to avoid doing that. So getting into Latham's pass pro, I think the best place to start is with his anchor. As a rookie tackle, power is the first thing that opposing edge rushers are going to test you with, and until you prove that you can drop your anchor and shut down a bull rush, they're going to keep hitting you with it. With Latham, the feeling out period where pass rushers would hit him with a bull rush to test his anchor, that was pretty short-lived because he had one of the best anchors that I've seen for a rookie offensive tackle. He's almost 6'6", 300 and whatever he weighs, over 35-inch arms, built in a lab from a physical traits perspective to counter bull rushes. But there are some other more subtle aspects of his game that really fortify his anchor and make it a dominant, almost impenetrable barrier when he's playing with good technique. The first thing that's kind of tangential to his size is how evenly dispersed his build is. His arms are built like an average person's legs. His legs are built like an average person's torso. He can really absorb a lot of momentum and kind of distribute it evenly throughout his body, redirect it back into the ground. There's nothing top heavy about his build or the way that he plays. He isn't a player where you can just centralize a speed to power rush kind of into his upper half and get him rocked back on his heels. He isn't too tall or upright. He can kind of naturally play underneath his opponent's pads. And that leads into the second element of what makes his anchor so good, which is his lower half flexibility. It's the exact same principle with nose tackles trying to anchor at the point of attack in the A-gap as it is with blockers trying to anchor against power. If you've got tight ankles and stiff, rigid hips that really prevent you from bending at the knees and truly sinking underneath that bull rush, you're basically just relying on pure mass to completely dissipate your opponent's power. Latham isn't the most flexible tackle you'll ever see, but he plays low enough and with enough knee bend to usually get the job done. And then the final element is hand usage. Being able to meet power with power, give a stiff two-hand punch to neutralize some of the rusher's upfield momentum, but also establish a point of contact so you can clinch up your opponent and lock down the rep. I would say Latham's about 70% of the way there as far as playing with consistent hand placement and strike timing. When his hand placement's good, he's an absolute doorstop that you can't move backwards. And normally it is very good, but the occasional losses that he had to power were almost all a result of being too wide with his punch and allowing too much contact into his frame. So I want to break down a few specific anchor reps. This rep against the Colts probably fits better in a later section, but it's my favorite JC Latham play from the entire season, so let's get into it. So he gets into his set, and immediately you see one of his go-to hand techniques, which is the flash or flash bait. This is a staple of his game, and it's one of the best ways to counter pass rushers that use a lot of cross chops and swipes, anything where they're attacking the outside hand. The idea with this technique is the tackle flashes his hand, usually his outside hand, which draws out the pass rusher's move a lot of times prematurely, and by taking control of the timing of the rep, it allows the tackle to dictate the point of contact. Everything a pass rusher does is predicated on their expected timing and sequencing of events. When these guys drill their chop and swipe moves, they're either doing it against a stationary tackling dummy or a really predictable assistant coach that's just kind of flashing a two-hand punch. They are trained from, their first high school practice that the moment they see the blocker flash his hands, that's when they need to initiate their move. So the flash bait technique is a great way to counter really, skilled handsy speed rushers and completely throw off the timing of their moves. But pass pro is kind of a rock, paper, scissors interaction where every strategical choice has its own drawback or thing that you've got to account for. The problem with the flash is you're kind of jabbing with these soft, light punches. You aren't forcefully initiating contact with a firm strike, but you also don't have your hands loaded and ready to punch if the rusher goes speed to power. So to get away with using the flash, you've got to be able to eat a bull rush on a moment's notice, even if your opponent establishes first contact, gets some early displacement. I said the most impressive aspect of Latham's game is his hand usage, but his anchor is actually what allows him to execute that patient play style without getting run over. So this play against the Colts flashes the outside hand, retreats, the rusher goes speed to power, Latham squares it up, really effective two-hand punch here. The inside hand is what's actually putting up resistance to his power, and then with the other hand, he's kind of forklifting the rusher's outside hand. You can see he's grabbing him at the wrist, basically just removing any point of contact along the outside track. But again, because he was using the flash technique, Dio does get kind of a clean shot on his chest, and he's able to create some initial displacement, but Latham just stamps that out, gets opened up a little bit to the inside, but he's able to recenter, stay connected to the block, and then start to work him backwards and eventually puts him on his back. There are way too many awesome anchor reps on his tape to break them all down in detail, but man, when he gives a tight two-hand punch inside the rusher's frame, strikes upward to lift them up and take away their leverage advantage, he's pretty much unstoppable if you're trying to rush him down the middle. I really like this rep against Washington. One of the key things I look for when I'm evaluating offensive linemen is recovery skills and the ability to get yourself out of compromising situations. Nobody in the NFL just wins every rep cleanly. When you're going up against pro edge rushers as an offensive tackle, you're going to find yourself in a lot of situations like this. He's playing with kind of independent hands, not really prepared to match the power with a firm two-hand punch. The rusher stabs him with a long arm, kind of pries back his inside shoulder. This 2-second clip is just a sequence of vulnerable positions one after the other. Latham is literally mid-air without a point of contact. His right hand is swinging out, his left hand is at his waist, but he's somehow able to transition from literally the worst position he could possibly be in. Neither of his feet are on the ground, and he doesn't have control of his opponent with his hands. He's able to transition from that to this in less than a second. He goes from mid-air to both feet planted firmly on the ground. From the moment he lands back on earth, he doesn't get walked back a single inch, preserving the width of the pocket. But in that same continuous motion, he's also able to refit his hands and go from getting longed arm literally into orbit with no point of contact on his opponent to having both hands firmly clinched inside. What a phenomenal play. I had this one set aside to talk about, but then going back through it in slow motion, there's just so many intricacies that are kind of unbelievable. This play is another example of how finishing strong, dying slowly, and really straining to recover for the entire rep can be the difference between a safety or strip sack in the end zone and an explosive play. So again, you can tell his priority is not oh, I gotta be prepared to set my anchor and eat this bull rush. He's confident that he can take a minor loss early in the rep, give up some initial ground, and he knows he's got the play strength and the ability to capture leverage in an instant to recover once he decides to set his anchor. So it looks like he's flashing the outside hand. I don't know if he was trying to do a full outside hand punch here. Regardless, he's exposing his frame. The rusher makes clean contact, starts to walk him back into the pocket, but from the point that they make contact where he's in a vulnerable position, Latham does the two things that he's got to do to recover. He refits, repositions his hands. You can see very quickly he's got his hands inside, right underneath the breastplate and the armpit, and the direction of his punch is upwards. He's trying to not only counteract the rusher's momentum, but lift his pad level and take away his leverage advantage. So great job refitting the hands. Again, dies slowly, gives a little bit of ground into the pocket, but at a certain point when he's about to get walked back into Will Levis's lap, he plants his roots with a wide base. You see him consistently do this. It's like when he decides the bull rush is over, it's over, and he's not getting displaced anymore. So he keeps a clean pocket. Will Levis has space to step into the throw, hits Calvin Ridley for a big gain down the sideline. Another example here, sorry there are so many of these power reps, but it's just all over his tape. I'll put chapters. This is kind of the epitome of what I'm talking about with striking upwards. You can really see him tie up his opponent, lift his pad level. The moment they make contact, the rusher has the leverage advantage. One more step into the rush, it's completely neutralized and the bull rush is stalled out. So let's move on to how he uses his hands to counter speed rushers. The way I see it, there are kind of 5 broad categories of hand techniques in pass pro. I'll list them on the screen, and being proficient in as many of these as possible is critical to be a quality up to elite offensive tackle in the NFL. When you watch college tackles, they don't really have the time to drill like a wide range of techniques. So it usually just ends up that the O-line coach teaches whatever, the outside hand punch or the two-hand punch. Like you watch the LSU guys, they're all just two-hand punching every single snap. Talise Fuaga last year pretty much exclusively used an outside hand punch. And for an NFL player in college, they're usually at enough of an advantage in terms of skill and athletic ability to get by with just a one-dimensional approach. If you try to just keep it simple like that in the NFL though, you will get carved up by below average pass rushers. From the standpoint of an edge rusher who's watching film on the tackle he's about to face, if he sees him just throwing his outside hand every single snap, he's like, oh, we're about to clean up on Sunday. Pretty much every technique gives you an advantage here, but then has a drawback in some other area. Like I said, it's a rock, paper, scissors situation. If a pass rusher knows what he's getting on every play with like 90% confidence, in the NFL, they're just way too good. Like they will win every snap. So pretty much every good NFL tackle is at least competent in multiple hand techniques. For JC Latham, he uses every one of these, except you don't really see him use an inside hand punch, which is probably the most rare of the 5, but his bread and butter is still the outside hand punch. Fairly self-explanatory technique. You're just punching with the outside hand. It's probably the most frequently used technique across the NFL, and it offers a nice blend of effectiveness when it hits without leaving you too vulnerable when it misses. There are some drawbacks, but overall it's a pretty tried and true strategy. It starts with his set. He does a good job here of establishing a half-man relationship with the rusher, playing him inside out. One of the benefits of using this strategy is that you're keeping your inside hand free. So if the rusher counters inside, you've got that ready to corral the move. But Latham gives a firm strike with the outside hand. Every O-line coach teaches it differently, but I've heard the placement you want kind of right above the armpit, riding up on the collarbone. And there's a real art with this technique of being simultaneously firm and light with your punch. So this rep, you see the firm, strong outside hand. It kind of gets covered up from this front angle, but Josh Allen goes in with the cross chop. He's trying to swat down Latham's outside hand that he just landed, but Latham has the grip strength to stay connected, survive the cross chop. On the downswing of the move, he comes back in with the inside hand to kind of contain him through the B gap. And then once that initial cross chop gets neutralized, Josh Allen transitions to power. Latham already has ideal hand placement. He's squared up with his opponent, so he can just sit down, stall out the bull rush pretty easily. But you got to be able to strike the balance between having some heat and some stopping power with your outside hand punch, but also being a bit light with it and not fully lunging into it and overextending yourself, exposing the corner. The punch should really be thought of as more something that's disrupting or stalling the rusher, as opposed to fully committing to the outside hand punch, leaning into it, trying to just annihilate your opponent on every play. Sometimes you can do that and it results in a dominant rep, but if you overcommit to try to maximize your power and you end up lunging forward, that puts you in a situation where you have to win with your outside hand punch. If you aren't able to tie up your opponent when you make contact and that outside hand gets chopped down, the rusher has a clear path around the corner and you're leaning too far forward to expand your set point and recover. This is something that I think overall he did a decent job of avoiding, but it got him in trouble in certain matchups, especially guys like Latham that use a bunch of cross chops and have really swift, precise hands. You see here, he lunges into the punch. Latham beats his outside hand. He's way too heavy and kind of full blast with his punch. He just isn't in any position to recover the outside. He beat him again with a cross chop later in the game. This rep I don't have as big of a problem with. The big thing is just ducking his head, but he does do a good job of replacing his hands, keeping his feet active while he's punching and refitting. Ultimately, I would give Latham the win here, but it's not a disastrous rep by any means, and it looks worse because when Levis breaks the pocket, he's just got a clear angle to him. Another play against Houston, this is way too committed with the outside hand. The rusher's able to latch onto his shoulder pads and kind of pull him around the corner. He gave up a pressure here against Trey Hendrickson, who he actually had a really solid matchup with. I thought that was one of his better performances. Hendrickson's more of a double swipe guy, but it's the same concept countering that as it is to the cross chop. This is just not a composed or balanced enough posture to be delivering an outside hand punch like this. Like I said earlier, from this point in the play, JC Latham's only hope is that he's able to survive that double swipe, stay connected through the downswing of his move, and then ride him around the arc. When his outside hand gets swatted down and he breaks contact, like is going to happen against good NFL pass rushers, he really has no recourse to recover along the outside track. But like I said, the best way to counter this is by playing with a light or soft outside hand, where your punch is really just like hand fighting, sparring with the opponent. You're not necessarily trying to deliver a knockout blow. When you throw your punch, you got to have a really sensitive trigger for when it's about to get swatted down, and be really quick and proactive to replace your punch. Open your hips when they declare along the outside track, flush them out of the pocket. Great rep here against Joey Bosa, who is much more of a name and reputation at this point, but still a solid player. Establishes half man with the pass set. The timing of the outside hand punch isn't ideal here because you can see it kind of intersects with the downswing of his move, so he gets hung up. But instead of lunging into that punch and overcommitting, the moment he starts to feel that outside hand get swatted down, he retracts his hand, doesn't give Bosa anything to latch onto. In a fluid motion, as he's mirroring him with his feet, he repositions his hands, stays perfectly centered to him until Levis breaks the pocket. And I think overall, across the entirety of his rookie tape, Latham did a really solid job of striking a balance between being firm and being light with his outside hand punch. This play against Josh Allen, good timing with the strike here, so he's making contact before the downswing of the cross chop, strong outside hand to survive the chop, corrals him with the inside hand, and then starts to get depth to protect the corner. Now, Latham gets kind of threatened here in the second half of the play. Once he ties up the initial cross chop, Allen tries to transition into this hump move or underhook. It's a really good counter for a tackle that's in this kind of position where he's upright, his hips are opened up basically to the back end zone. He only has one foot on the ground and he's kind of leaning upfield. A really effective counter is to use this hump move where you just hook underneath the inside arm, pry open the B gap, but you can see the way Latham's able to easily recapture control. Goes from standing straight up, basically on one foot, to a low, centered, balanced base. Once he drops his anchor and plants his roots, that's curtains for the bull rush. This is not a pressure that Latham gave up, by the way. Mason Rudolph just ran into the pressure. But then later in the same game, week 17 against Jacksonville, Josh Allen, who, if You figured it out by now, loves using the cross chop. This time, he actually wins with the cross chop, defeats his outside hand, but instead of lunging into his punch, he's got a quick response time to retreat with his outside hand once he feels it start to get beat. Doesn't give Allen anything to hook or latch onto as he's trying to round the corner. Latham flips his hips, seals him off from the pocket, then reestablishes his hands. Great rep here. He had some really good matchups with Josh Hines Allen. Gave up a few pressures, like it was a competitive back and forth matchup, but just as far as high quality one-on-one reps, I think his performance against Josh Hines Allen and Trayvon Walker when he lined up there were two of his more impressive single game performances. Two more plays here, rapid fire. This time he's got Quinnen Williams lined up off the edge. With this matchup, he actually can afford to be more aggressive and full throttle with that outside hand punch, because Quinnen Williams is a great player, but he's not like an edge burner. So, I mean, Latham just stabs him with this outside hand, stays connected for the entire rep, and maintaining that point of contact actually does a lot to stall his momentum, prevent him from building up enough speed to round the corner. And then final outside hand play here against AJ Epinesa. He's threatening this inside move through the B gap, so Latham's got to kind of give him a short corner here to protect against that counter. But he transitions to this Euro step cross chop. Not the best timing here with the outside hand punch because he does get hooked. But I mean, look at Latham's weight displacement here as he's throwing this punch and compare it to some of the previous reps, like the losses that I showed. It's night and day the difference. He is sitting back, fully prepared to expand, get additional depth if he needs to. Outside hand gets cross chopped. It doesn't matter because he's in a balanced position. He retreats, opens his hips, runs him around the arc. If he can just get a little bit more consistent with not fully lunging into that outside hand punch, I really think he's going to have a lot of success. And you saw him improve over the course of the season. Like, you watch his first matchup with Laiatu Latu and his second matchup, he took a completely different approach to those two games. And you really saw the steady progression throughout the season. But then the flash bait is a great counter strategy that builds off of that outside hand punch. And it's not his most frequently used technique, but I would say it's one of his signature moves. Not that he like invented it, it's just something that he uses a lot more often than you see for most NFL tackles. So we talked about this some earlier in the video, so I don't need to start from square one and explain the basics, but this is, I think, the optimal strategy to counter the Josh Allen types and the Laiatu Latu types, players that are getting, 30, 40% of their pressures with a cross chop. You see here, Latu gets upfield, Latham flashes the outside hand. That triggers the years and years of training where the minute you see a hand or a bag or a dummy or whatever, you're throwing your swipe or your chop. Latu initiates his cross chop. Now, a lot of times the tackle will fully retreat with the outside hand and wait for the rusher to whiff and, have his cross chop land on air. Latham actually comes back with his replacement punch like a tick earlier than you would normally see, but you can see the moment that their arms lock, Latu is swinging his arm downward, Latham is shooting his punch upward. So his outside hand isn't really as susceptible to getting chopped down as it normally would be because he's counteracting that downward force with some upward resistance. And ultimately, that combined with the disrupted timing pretty much neutralizes Latu's rush. This play, he flashes the outside hand, doesn't even really draw out a move. It just kind of throws off the sequencing of the play for Laiatu Latu. Tries to get into a late bull rush, but without a head of steam, that's not really going anywhere. Nice rep here against Daniil Hunter. Flash the hand, draws out the dip rip speed move, doesn't get overextended, keeps his feet moving, washes him upfield. Another one from the other Houston game, outside hand flash, draws out the cross chop, pulls the rug out from under him with pretty much perfect timing here. Good job using the inside hand here to wall off any counter through the B gap, force him to commit to the outside track. Really textbook play here. I don't think 95 is a very good player though. And I'll show the rest of the flash speed rush clips that I have, but take note of when all of these plays are happening. Every flash bait rep that I have saved for Latham came week 12 or later. This is clearly something that he was working on over the course of the season and added it to his arsenal by the end of the year. It made him much more equipped to counter Laiatu Latu in week 16. Gave him the ability to have really competitive matchups with Josh Allen, Trey Hendrickson. You saw some improvement also in the second Houston matchup in week 18, where it was more fully integrated into his skill set. This is really the best way to counter the top tier speed rushers he's going to have to face if you don't have elite pocket range and elite foot speed. But with this technique, it puts you in a position where you've got to be able to counter pretty much a three-way go. I mean, the ability to play with this patient play style and flash your hands like this, and then pretty much catch a bull rush at full speed, give up 1 or 2 steps into the pocket, and then shut it down completely is so impressive. This is a beautiful rep here. Bad competition level alert. I think this guy was a UDFA or like a late round draft pick last year, but flashes the outside hand, immediately goes speed to power. It's a bad pass rushing rep now that I watch it over and over again, but still just absorbs the initial contact like it's nothing, sets his anchor, then starts to work back in the other direction and redirect him, put him on the ground a little bit. But here we get another one with Josh Allen. Flash, immediate bull rush, barely even looks like he feels that initial jolt. Slight reset with a couple steps backwards, and then just completely dissipates the bull rush. Next play, again, Josh Allen, outside hand flash, speed to power, puts him in timeout. I promise I'm not just showing the same rep over and over again. This is just something he executes consistently, especially later in the season. Even if you don't cleanly neutralize a fully executed move, sometimes he can just throw his opponent off beat, force him into kind of a clunky transition into his move. So you can see here when Allen goes speed to power, he just can't initiate it with enough force and create that early knockback. And if you can't rattle Latham initially, you're not just gonna like drive your legs and walk him back into the pocket. And then the other benefit of any outside hand dominant strike, whether it's a full outside hand strike or the flash technique, is that you're keeping that inside hand unoccupied, ready to contain any move through the B gap. This was by far my biggest concern with JC Latham coming out of Alabama, was his ability or inability to mirror inside counters. There's a rep that sticks out, him against Jalen Walker, I'm pretty sure in the SEC championship game from last year, where Walker crosses his face, and I mean, it looks like he's just moving in quicksand when he tries to mirror him. At times he looked unable to move his feet quickly enough to really survive on an island, but that was the biggest pleasant surprise for JC Latham in his rookie season. And it's another thing that just makes the whole weight gain and loss thing more confusing. Even in weeks where he was supposedly 370 pounds, I thought he looked like he had much lighter feet than he ever did in college. But yeah, you see this play against Josh Allen, flashes the outside hand, Allen tries to cross his face, sticks him with the inside hand punch. And then another thing that he shows consistently is having a really strong inside hand to stay connected, cut off those moves with the inside with his upper body while he works to recover and mirror him with his lower body. This rep against Washington, flash, the rusher counters with an inside spin, Latham catches it, mirrors him, puts him on the ground. This play, Dion Yingbo tries to execute one of the least coordinated looking inside counters I've ever seen. Latham doesn't even really have to mirror him on this play. He lands the inside hand with some heat. It's kind of hard to tell from this angle, but it looks like he might have hooked him from the collar and then slammed him down with essentially like a snatch trap. Either way, I mean, brick wall on an island against not the most skilled pass rusher, but a freak athlete for sure. And then one more here, probably the most impressive rep from this inside counter section actually. This play, Dio goes with a fake cross chop into an inside spin. Latham not only does a great job of countering this technically, but the most impressive aspect of this rep is his anticipation and the quick response time to read the move really before he initiates it. He lifts up his inside arm like he's about to come in with a cross chop. Such a great job by Latham to sense that deceleration. Like if he was really trying to attack the edge, he'd be going full speed upfield, but he feels him kind of start to sink his hips, redirect back inside. In this situation, Latham's inside hand is the #1 point of resistance that he has to protect the B gap. The rusher's going to try to seal off the inside shoulder with what's called the ice pick technique, where he wraps around this offhand and ideally pins Latham's inside hand, removes his, physical ability to recover and resist through the B gap. But Latham does an excellent job of proactively containing the inside move while not being too aggressive with it and putting his inside hand in danger to getting hooked. While we're kind of on the subject, I've got some other miscellaneous inside counter reps that are pretty good. This is a really good job sealing off, more of a standard face-up crossover move from Joey Bosa. This quick redirection ability that he shows on this rep against Buffalo, like this is the kind of thing I didn't think he really had coming out of college. And I say that as someone that loved him as a prospect. I just thought that was his one Achilles heel. When I started to see him, set a little bit to the outside and then quickly redirect, seal off that B gap, kind of raised my eyebrows because he just didn't really look like that kind of athlete at Alabama. And then final inside counter rep, this one falls firmly in the category of initially a bad play from a technique standpoint, but it's ultimately really impressive because of how he was able to recover from that compromising situation. So he's trying to get some early width and depth in his set to meet the rusher upfield, cut off that angle around the outside. He ends up taking too severe of an angle here. He isn't playing with an ideal, balanced square base. And then he's also got his hips opened up to the sideline, so he's really exposing the B gap. The pass rusher counters it, seems to have a clear pathway directly towards the quarterback, but this is exactly what I mean when I say that Latham has a strong, firm inside hand. He latches on with his right hand. That's his only leverage point to keep him out of the B gap, but he's got the grip strength to stay attached when he makes contact. As he slides with him, he starts to establish that outside hand placement underneath the armpit, travels with him step for step across the width of like 2 or 3 gaps, and completely shuts him down. There are 2 final points I want to hit on for pass pro. 2 weaknesses / issues that gave him some trouble at times. The first one isn't, breaking news or anything, but despite the slight fluctuations in weight and athleticism and some improvements that he showed at times, he's still a below average athlete by NFL tackle standards, just in terms of foot speed, mirror ability, pocket range. There are times when he gets into just a straight up foot race to the corner where he just doesn't really have the juice to meet the rusher at the top of the arc. I think his footwork and kick steps when it comes to his 45-degree sets are kind of up and down. Sometimes he looks more quick and fluid. Other times it looks more like he's kind of swimming upstream to try to get to his set points. I'm pretty confident the footwork will continue to improve, but I do think there are some athletic limitations that, might not like ruin his career, but could just put a bit of a cap on his ceiling, or even if he ends up as a really good player, just cause him to get beat occasionally in ways that bona fide all-pro tackles won't get beat. Several of the plays in this category were week 1 against Chicago, where, he just looked nothing in that game like he did the rest of the season. So I'm perfectly fine throwing out that game from an evaluation standpoint. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if his foot speed noticeably improves, having lost about 30 pounds. Like I said, I'm not the type to bank on that kind of stuff happening, but I am very interested to see what he looks like as an athlete now that he's in the best shape of his life. And then the final point of improvement, I would say, I don't think this is a limitation, but issue that popped up on his tape was some lapses against power, specifically when a rusher's able to centralize his force and really target like his inside shoulder especially. He's got a strong inside hand, but the inside shoulder can be a little bit soft at times and get him exposed through the B gap. This play against Josh Allen is kind of the perfect example of that. Gives up a sack. Really, I think the root of the problem here is the angle that he's engaging with the rusher. If he was squared up a bit more and playing the rusher inside out, I think he'd have no problem in this exact situation. But the angle of engagement kind of gives Allen a favorable rush angle and opens him up through the inside shoulder. Trayvon Walker gets kind of a similar pressure on him. He didn't really struggle with face-up inside counters, and he didn't really struggle with straight down the middle bull rushes, but kind of the hybrid of those 2 moves where the rusher's able to just stab at the inside shoulder, open up a pathway through the B gap, that gave him some trouble at times. There were really good reps of him countering that, but much more of a mixed bag. This might be the most cumulative force that JC Latham ever had to withstand on a single play in his rookie year, and it's honestly one of the worst reps of the season. It kind of looks like he's going with an outside hand flash here, but the way that the movements kind of sequence together, it ends up just being an awful bear hug. He absorbs way too much contact, gets rocked back on his heels. Again, unless he trips or gets, his feet tied up, he isn't just getting driven onto his back or anything. The secondary recovery effort here is actually decent compared to, where he is from the starting point. But by the time he's able to drop his anchor, he's already so far back in the pocket. Barnett's able to counter to an outside move. Rudolph is just kind of drifting behind the pocket. Easy angle for him to get the sack, or I guess Barnett got the pressure. If there's one thing that I think Latham would benefit from adding to his bag, it's a snatch trap technique. I'll put an example on the screen. I don't think I saw him use it one time in the NFL. Maybe use it a couple times at Bama, but it's a really good tool to kind of have in your back pocket as like an emergency backup plan. On the occasion that he gets walked back initially into the pocket, the rusher's getting low underneath his pads, fully extending with a long arm or a bull rush. If he could just counter that with a quick snatch trap, release contact, put him on his face, I think that's a really valuable and effective change up that he could integrate into his game. But yeah, that's basically my thesis paper on JC Latham as a pass blocker. Overall, I just think it's such a rare blend of size, power, and skill. If losing 30 pounds makes him 10% more athletic and he's able to be like a league average tackle in terms of foot speed, I think you're looking at like Pro Bowl, borderline all pro upside, assuming that he continues to polish up his technique like he's been doing, over the course of the last 2 years. But if he isn't able to significantly improve as an athlete and he just, continues to make marginal, steady technical development, I think he's easily on track to be, like a Rob Havenstein, Darnell Wright, maybe like Orlando Brown Jr. caliber of pass protector, kind of just a quality starter. Maybe they get into the Pro Bowl as like an alternate every now and then. I think that's a pretty easy floor to project, or maybe not a floor, but like a 10th percentile outcome. The run blocking is a much less layered conversation, I guess. I think that Latham has an extremely defined and kind of specialized skill set in the run game. There's a clear set of assignments that he can execute at a high to dominant level. And then there's some things that you just really can't ask him to do. And those strengths and weaknesses are pretty unsurprising, I think, to anyone that's familiar with JC Latham. The number one thing that he brings to the table is his drive power and the gap scheme run game. When he gets fully centered to a block and takes commanding control, plays with good leverage, the vertical displacement that he's able to generate one-on-one at the point of attack is insane sometimes. It's pretty much the same skills and traits that give him a good anchor. It's just working in the opposite direction. Instead of bending his knees and sitting down against a bull rush, he's driving his legs, moving someone off the line. He was overall an up and down run blocker. And I thought that Peter Skoronski, who really broke out in pass protection, I thought he took a pretty significant step back in the run game as well. The one thing that they both did at an extremely high level was those combo blocks on duo and inside zone. They were consistently able to uproot a 3-tech out of the B gap and create a pretty clear rushing lane. And I think those combos will be just as effective with Latham and Zeitler working in combination. So when it comes to just one-on-one downhill run blocking, any assignment where he can reach the player that he's supposed to block before the snap, he was, I think, above average in that regard. Whether it's a combo block, one-on-one down block, a base block, like widening the front side B gap, any kind of short range reach block, like on the front side of wide zone where he doesn't have to cover a lot of ground to actually secure contact. He executes those at a pretty good level. He is a bit inconsistent at staying centered to the block and sustaining it for long enough for the running back to hit the gap. He isn't a very sticky run blocker. Like, he falls off of blocks way too often. That did improve noticeably over the second half of the year. There were a lot fewer like negative plays and decisive losses in the run game. But at this point, I think he's still a net positive in the gap scheme run game, but a little bit more boom bust than you would like. I've also been somewhat underwhelmed by his play demeanor and like physical competitive edge in the run game. Not that he's in any way soft or like shies away from contact. He just doesn't have quite the finishing mentality of some of the better run blockers in the league. And then his ability to pull, climb to the second level, get out in open space, that is a limitation, but it's kind of like his foot speed in pass pro, where I actually saw some signs of improvement. Like, he had a lot more success blocking 5+ yards downfield as a rookie than he ever did at Bama. There are still plays where, he's got a difficult assignment climbing to the second level and he just doesn't have the speed or the range to get there in time. I haven't really ever seen him execute backside cutoffs and difficult reach blocks at a really high level. And I really think the majority of the limitations that do exist with him as a run blocker, you don't actually see on tape because those limitations materialize by limiting what kind of runs the offensive coordinator can call. I felt like after week 5 or so, they started to do a much better job of just not giving him assignments that he can't execute. And when he's in a role that shields him from those high difficulty blocks on the move, to me, his run blocking tape was pretty solid as a rookie. This explosive run from Tony Pollard against Miami is an outstanding job of climbing to the second level. Like I mentioned, being a sticky run blocker, even though the linebacker's trying to slip around the block, he keeps that outside hand connected, guides him away from the running back's path. This is an even more difficult block than it might look like on tape because you got to have that sense for the running back's path while your back's turned to him. So really good spatial awareness, coordination, block sustain here. Also, didn't even mention the beginning of the rep, he partially contributes to a nice double team with him and Skoronski. He made a lot of diving, miraculous blocks at the second level that to the untrained eye or the flag happy ref might look like holding. And I mean, I'm anti-penalty in every regard, but this is the kind of thing that does get called sometimes whenever you're hooking the arm or hooking the side of the jersey. If I was in charge, I would ban all holding penalties where you can't visibly see a jersey being stretched, but that is the kind of ticky-tack thing that will get called sometimes. This play here against Jacksonville, this is the kind of play I was talking about where if the linebacker keyed this on time and he was actually running full speed towards the play side, this is the kind of block that he can't really execute. He's out-leveraged pre-snap. He just doesn't have the makeup speed to cut him off if they're both running full speed. But with Devin Lloyd getting distracted by the eye candy motion here, that gives him a head start, allows him to get leverage down at the second level. And on these plays where he isn't being stressed to the max with trying to reach a really difficult aiming point, he actually played with pretty impressive composure and balance, redirecting and connecting to blocks at the second level. A lot more consistent and secure getting into his block fits than I remember from his Bama tape. And then as a puller, I mean, it doesn't look pretty very often, but a lot more capable out in space than I was expecting. This play is really more of a slice block than a pull, but able to latch on to Andrew Van Ginkel, toss him onto the ground. Here he gets out in space on this slip screen, walls off the DB. When he tries to slip under the block, this is the advantage of having long arms when it comes to blocking out in space. Just having that extra inch to stay connected for a little bit longer when the blocker's trying to really press the edge of your radius of impact, that can make a huge difference between an explosive play and a 2-yard gain. This is a nice job against Houston of making initial contact and then re-securing the block once the runner veers out to the edge. Really impressed with his fluidity and control as a downfield blocker. And then this play against the Chargers looks like kind of the upper limit of his range as a puller. Gets there just in time to not even cleanly make the block, but basically rip the tackler off of Calvin Ridley. The final aspect of the run game that's worth mentioning, maybe should have talked about this with the down blocks and gap scheme stuff, but it's just his upper body power to toss defenders around the field. Because there is some room for improvement as far as sustaining and securing blocks balanced at the point of attack, he's able to make up for some of those deficiencies with just violent, devastating upper body torque. He's one of a handful of players who can, try to displace somebody for a couple seconds, stall out, and then just shot put his opponent 5 yards across the field. If he gets a linebacker or a smaller edge just kind of lined right up for him, he can uproot them and completely eliminate them from the play. All right, approaching the finish line here. The final aspect of Latham's tape that I need to mention is the penalties. He had 10 penalties in 2024, which ranked near the top or bottom of the league, depending on how you look at it. But only one of them was him getting beat and holding so he didn't give up a sack or a pressure. There was an illegal block above the waist on a run play, and then the rest of his penalties were false starts. That's still something he's got to clean up, but when you see 10 penalties, with a lot of players, like 8 of those are decisive losses in pass pro that should have been sacks or pressures. False starts are at least more straightforward of an issue to improve. I will say, though, that was an issue at Bama, and as far as him improving there, I'll believe it when I see it. All right, that is going to wrap up the film evaluation. Going to be finishing all of these individual player breakdowns by showing their scouting report with strengths and weaknesses, and then their skill ratings. The skill ratings are scaled based on NFL starters, where 50 in a particular skill or trait is adequate, 75 and up is very good, 25 and lower is poor. In pass pro, it's really just the range and the mirror ability that's kind of the one weakness for him. Strike power, I would say, is his one elite trait. I think that in year 2 and forward, anchor has a chance to be, one of the dominant things that he brings to the table. And especially for a rookie, very advanced in terms of his bag, as a pass blocker and his hand usage, the multiple strategies that he has to keep rushers off balance and guessing. In the run game, really good drive power, can move people off the line of scrimmage. Not much of a zone blocker, especially over the first half of the season. I thought there were some missed assignments, like out in open space, not knowing where he's supposed to climb, that kind of thing. But his actual ability to secure and sustain second level blocks was a pleasant surprise. That's going to do it for the JC Latham breakdown. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to like and leave a comment to help the algorithm. Greatly appreciate that. And stay tuned for an onslaught of film breakdowns. I've got like 6 currently in the works. So be on the lookout for those, and I hope you guys enjoy.